This is a real interview translated into English. You can find the original story through the link in the description.
Hi, my name is Leah, and I live in Canada. Right now, I live near Vancouver in a small town called Port Moody. I've been living here for 1 year, and this place really suits my lifestyle now. Before that, I lived in Toronto for 3.5 years. So overall, I have almost 5 years of experience living in Canada, with different priorities at different stages of my life. As for where I came from, it's a bit of a long story. I lived in different countries, and there was a lot of uncertainty along the way. Before Canada, I lived in the United States, and before that, I lived in Israel. But the country where I was born is Ukraine. So, yes, I took a long path and moved a lot before I finally arrived near Vancouver. Each move required a thorough decision, and now I feel that this place matches my current priority in life. So my main advice is this. Choose a place based on thorough research and your own priorities, not because it looks popular or seems easier at first. This approach will save you from a lot of uncertainty later on. Instead of returning to Israel, we decided that our priority was to stay in North America and move to Canada. We chose this path through a student program, and that is how we made the move. We decided to go to Toronto because at that moment, it seemed like the option that would suit us best for starting a new life. Toronto felt more comfortable in terms of finding a job and adapting. There is a large Russian-speaking community. I have relatives there. And there are many colleges with a wide choice of study programs. We did a thorough comparison of different cities and educational options. And because of all these reasons, we decided that Toronto would be the best place for us to move to. Life in Israel was actually quite good for us. Yes, I do have Jewish roots, and overall, we felt okay living there. At that time, our main priority was family stability, and in many ways, Israel could offer that. However, Israel has its own realities that many people already know about. The main issue is security. You never really feel fully safe, and this creates constant uncertainty. There are ongoing tensions, terrorist attacks, suspicions, and periods of war. This background stress is always present in everyday life. We understood the economic side more clearly after we moved to the United States and later to Canada. In economic terms, life here suits us much better, especially as a family with children. There are more opportunities to support yourself and build a stable and predictable life. Another important reason was my husband's job. He got an opportunity to transfer to the United States through his work. We made a thorough decision as a family, and it felt like a very interesting chance to see the world and try something new. So, of course, we decided to go for it. If we talk about moving from Israel to the United States and then to Canada, there are definitely some advantages of having an Israeli passport. First of all, when it comes to Canada, there are many benefits. With an Israeli passport, you do not need a visa to enter Canada as a tourist. You can come and stay for up to 3 months, and sometimes even longer, without applying for a visa at all. This removes a lot of uncertainty at the very beginning and makes the first steps much easier. As for the United States, a visa is still required, and it is not given to everyone. The process can be more complicated, but compared to many other countries, having an Israeli passport can still suit you better and make the process slightly easier.
Another important advantage is the level of English. Many Israelis speak English quite well because it is taught at a good level in schools. Also, Israel is a country with a lot of tourists, so people are used to communicating in English in everyday life. This becomes a priority when you move to an English-speaking country. Overall, apart from visa-related benefits and language skills, I would not say there are many big advantages. But these 2 points, easier entry and better English, can make a real difference, especially at the beginning, when you are trying to make thorough and careful decisions about your future. When we arrived in Canada, I quickly realized that my expectations and reality were quite different. Because we had lived for many years in warm countries, we thought it would be interesting to experience a Canadian winter, especially in Toronto. At that time, it did not feel like a priority to think seriously about the climate. And yes, it was interesting, but much less pleasant than I expected. The climate was really hard for me, and it took time to get used to it. The mentality was also very different. Canada, the United States, and Israel all have completely different cultures, so each move felt like a new cultural shock. With every relocation, there was a lot of uncertainty, because you never fully know what kind of life and people you will face. One thing that surprised us in a positive way was how much support families with children receive from the government. We actually did not know this before moving to Canada, because we did not do a very thorough research at the beginning. After some time, the government started paying benefits for our children simply because they are children. After about a year and a half of living in Canada, we began to receive financial support. There are many different social programs in Canada. Most of them are created for Canadian citizens, but even immigrants can sometimes access basic courses or receive minimal support through these programs. This kind of system really suits families with children. Another big surprise for us was Toronto itself. In the area where we lived, we expected to see many local Canadians. But in reality, Toronto is a city of immigrants. There are a huge number of people from Asia and from many other parts of the world. Native Canadians are actually not that common. So in a way, it felt like we moved to a country with many different nationalities, but not necessarily to a place where you meet many local Canadians in everyday life. In the part of Toronto where we lived, I would say that local Canadians were probably only about 20%. But this was a very specific area in the city center, and our experience does not fully represent the whole city. Still, it created some uncertainty at first about what everyday life in Canada would really look like. There were many colleges nearby, and these colleges are focused on international students. A large number of students there come from other countries. Inside the colleges, the situation was very similar. There were almost as many international students as Canadian ones. For many people, studying in such an environment can actually suit them better because it feels more international and familiar. Because of this, when you walk around, you mostly see very different faces, hear many accents, and hear different languages. Diversity becomes the main priority in everyday life there. We did not do a very thorough analysis of the neighborhood before moving in, but this mix of cultures became our normal daily experience. You feel the diversity everywhere, but you do not really hear or see many local Canadian voices in daily life. That was our main impression of Toronto at that time. When I moved to Canada, I was almost 40 years old. I was around that age when I became a student again. There were not many students like me, but I was not completely alone. There were maybe 2 or 3 people of a similar age, and I also found a few Russian-speaking friends. Still, most students were young people, usually 20 years old or older. Is it harder to move and study at this age? Yes. It really depends on the person and the situation. In our case, we did it because my husband absolutely did not want to return to Israel. Staying in North America became our main priority, so we decided to move forward with this plan. Emotionally, it was hard. This was my third migration, and it brought a lot of stress and uncertainty. You are in a new country again. Everything is unfamiliar, and there is constant pressure. As an international student, you cannot afford to fail any course. Education is very expensive. One course can cost around $1,100, and failing it becomes a serious financial problem. At the same time, you are surrounded by a lot of young people. The program itself was not very difficult for me, but because everything was new, a new country, new system, new rules, it was much harder to focus on studying. It took time to understand what really suits you in this new environment. Another difficult part at this age is family life. You have less time for your children because you study, try to work part-time, and do homework. Your schedule becomes very intense, and it is hard to balance everything. Children are another important factor. If your children are older, the move can be very difficult for them too. A new country, a different mentality, new schools, all of this requires a very thorough adaptation process, especially for teenagers. They already have their own life, friends, and environment, and moving breaks that stability. This creates extra emotional pressure for parents, because you are not only adapting yourself, but also trying to support your children and help them feel safe and stable in a completely new place. It took some time to feel at least a little comfortable in Canada, to feel almost like my own. But I still cannot say that I feel equal to Canadians. For a long time, everything around us felt unstable and full of uncertainty. First of all, our immigration process is still not finished. We have been in Canada for almost 5 years, and we still do not have permanent resident status. Because of this ongoing uncertainty, it is hard to fully feel like you belong here or to plan life long-term. Second, Canadians themselves are quite reserved. Both English-speaking and French-speaking Canadians tend to be more closed compared to Americans or Israelis. They keep more distance, and it is harder to truly integrate into their society. Over time, we realized that building close relationships here requires a very thorough and patient approach. Because of this, our social circle mostly consists of immigrants, people from Israel or from former Soviet Union countries. Communication with Canadians is minimal, or sometimes does not exist at all. As for our immigration status and future plans, only recently did real opportunities finally appear. Through my husband's work, we received a nomination from the Provincial Nominee Program of British Columbia. At that moment, finishing our immigration process became our main priority. Because of that, we have already submitted our application for permanent residency in Canada. The application process will likely take about 1.5 to 2 years. During this time, we will still remain on temporary status, which again brings some level of uncertainty into everyday life. This is our current situation. We believe that our chances are good because the province nominated us and we had all the required documents ready. We went through a very thorough preparation process to make sure everything was in order. This nomination was actually one of the main reasons why we moved from Toronto to British Columbia. Even though Toronto is much bigger and has many job opportunities, it did not really suit our immigration goals. We were not able to find a job for my husband that met the requirements of this program. The job had to be full-time, have a specific status, and include certain benefits. We could not find such a position in Toronto, so we moved to the Vancouver area. This region suits our situation much better. Here, we were finally able to find the right job, and that allowed us to move forward with our immigration process and make it our top priority. When I was choosing where to move in Canada, I chose Toronto. At that time, it seemed like the safest option, but now, looking back, I regret that decision. There was a lot of uncertainty, and I did not fully understand what kind of life would actually suit me and my family. I believe that for us, it would have been better to move to Vancouver from the very beginning. In terms of climate and lifestyle, Vancouver clearly suits me much more. Toronto is a huge metropolis. It is about 3 or even 4 times bigger than Vancouver and the surrounding cities. Many people move there because Toronto has large immigrant communities from all over the world. There are big Chinatowns, a large Russian-speaking community with its own shops and businesses, and also a strong Ukrainian community with churches and places where people gather. This attracts new immigrants because many people are afraid of living in complete uncertainty in a totally unfamiliar environment without people from their own country. Having a familiar community often becomes a priority at the beginning. However, at the same time, competition in Toronto is much higher. For one job position, there can be 150 or even 200 applicants, which makes it much harder to get a job. The lifestyle in Toronto is much faster and more demanding. I felt like I was constantly running somewhere, trying to keep up. Long distances, commuting, and traveling inside the city take a lot of time. You are always busy, but without a clear feeling of progress, which adds even more uncertainty to everyday life. In Vancouver, life feels much slower and calmer. Nature here is incredibly beautiful. The ocean, the mountains, and the forests are all very close. You can go for a hike or a walk in the forest within 10 to 15 minutes from your home. For me, balance and quality of life became a priority, and this lifestyle really suits that need. In Toronto, you usually need a car and about an hour of driving just to reach nature. When it comes to work, I agree that there are certain fields where it might be easier to find a job in Toronto. Still, I believe that Vancouver also has enough opportunities. You just need a more thorough approach, building connections, meeting people, joining groups, and trying to integrate. With a thorough effort and networking, it is possible to find work and get recommendations. Overall, despite some advantages of Toronto, I still choose Vancouver. For me, the lifestyle, nature, and overall pace of life here suit me much better, and that makes all the difference. If I try to describe Canada in general and compare it with other countries, especially with the United States, I would say that Canada feels much more social-oriented. From the beginning, social support clearly becomes a priority here. There is a lot of support from the government. Families, children, and people who cannot fully support themselves receive serious help from the state. Social programs are more developed, and the government plays an active role in supporting people. This creates a feeling of stability and reduces some of the uncertainty that many immigrants experience in the first years. At the same time, taxes in Canada are higher than in the United States. This is especially noticeable if you compare Canada with some U.S. states where we lived before. Prices in general are also higher. Gas, basic food products, domestic flights, and education all tends to be more expensive in Canada than in the U.S. For some people, this lifestyle may not suit them financially. Of course, people often say that life in the United States is very expensive as well. And that is true. But it really depends on the state. The U.S. is very diverse, and you need a thorough comparison to understand the real differences. For example, in states like Texas, taxes are much lower, and prices for housing, gas, and food are also lower. Because of this, many companies are now moving their headquarters there, and this trend is becoming more common. On the other hand, States like California and New York are much more expensive. Florida can be cheaper in some aspects. So, in the US, everything strongly depends on the specific state and whether it suits your lifestyle and financial situation. Compared to this, Canada feels more balanced and stable. This balance is a priority for many families, even though life here is more expensive and more regulated, and sometimes involves less flexibility and more rules.
At the moment, we are renting housing. We rented in Toronto, we rent here now, and before that we also rented in Texas. Since we still do not have permanent status, buying property is not a priority for us right now. There is still too much uncertainty about how long we will stay here and how our situation will develop. So renting feels like the safest and most flexible option. Right now, we rent a small house with 3 bedrooms. The rent is around $2,000 per month, more or less. For our family and current lifestyle, this option suits us better than buying something we might need to leave later. As for commuting, we were actually quite lucky. I work from home, which suits me perfectly and helps reduce daily stress. My husband goes to his office, and it takes him about 30 minutes. His office is not even in Vancouver, but in another nearby city. If you need to get to Vancouver itself, it usually takes around 40 to 50 minutes. There is a metro line that goes directly to our town, and using the same line you can get to downtown Vancouver in about 40 to 50 minutes. Before choosing this area, we did a thorough check of transportation options, and that made everyday life much easier for us. I was very lucky with my job. I got a position in a company that belongs to my relative in California. Of course, my education in Canada helped me a lot, and getting this first experience became an important priority for me. I studied in a 2-year program called International Business. It focused on business and international trade. This program gave me a basic foundation. I learned how to work with Excel and some programs used for communication, emails, and everyday office tasks. I also studied basic economics, which helped reduce some of the uncertainty I had when entering the job market. To be honest, many courses from the program were not very useful for my current job. Still, the overall program suited my situation at that time, because it helped me enter this field and get my first position. Now, I work for my relative's company and work from home, which suits my lifestyle very well. My husband found a job here in Canada as well. He works for a company that is building a new metro line. He is responsible for developing network systems that are needed for communication when people pay with cards and use the metro. Before accepting this role, we did a thorough check to make sure it met all the requirements of the provincial nomination program in British Columbia. He works full-time, 40 hours per week. His job fits the program perfectly. 8 hours a day, office work, and full-time employee status. I do not know if it is okay to talk openly about salaries, but I can honestly say that we do not earn a lot, and this situation comes with a lot of uncertainty. Personally, I earn very little. I work with payroll. I calculate salaries for workers, see bonuses, increases, and reductions. Because of this, I clearly understand how salaries work, and I know that my pay is quite low. This is partly because I am the only employee in the company who does not live in the US. I am not an American citizen, and I work part-time. This arrangement does not really suit me financially, but for now, it fits my situation. Many businesses use this kind of uncertainty. When you have a temporary status, you often have fewer options, and employers know that you are more likely to agree to a lower salary. You try to hold on to any opportunity, and companies sometimes take advantage of that. My husband's salary is also not very high. He earns around $60,000 per year.
I would not say that this is a comfortable income for a family in Canada, but at that stage, our main priority was stability, not income growth. At that moment, it was important for us to get a foothold. Businesses understand this very well. This was the offer they gave, and my husband did not negotiate. After a thorough discussion, we decided that stability and future prospects were more important than trying to push for a higher salary right away. I am paid by the hour. My income depends on how many hours I work and how much I am needed at a specific time. On average, office work like mine usually starts from around $20 per hour and can go higher depending on experience and role. Right now, my financial situation is not really positive. But this is also partly because of my personality. I want everything at once. I want my children to attend different activities and programs, and I also want to travel and explore Canada. For me and my husband, traveling is a priority. When we move to a new country, we want to understand it deeply, see different places, and really enjoy the experience, even if it creates some financial uncertainty. Yes, I could earn more if I worked weekends or took on extra hours, but at this point, that option does not really suit my lifestyle or my family priorities. If we talk about our total income, I would not say that it allows us to be in a positive financial situation right now. There is still a lot of uncertainty, especially when it comes to long-term planning. We have very large expenses. First of all, during the first year, we spent around $15,000 just on tuition. Then there are significant costs for professional consultants, both financial and immigration consultants. These are not optional expenses. After a thorough review of our situation, we understood that professional help was necessary. The application for permanent residence itself cost more than $3,000. On top of that, every time we extend passports or submit temporary documents in Canada, it costs hundreds of dollars again. All of this adds to the financial uncertainty we are living with. Because of this, saving money is not a priority for me right now. My main goal at this stage is simply not to fall into a serious financial deficit. Stability matters more than savings at the moment. At the same time, Canada offers many financial tools that actually suit people in situations like ours. Banks are usually quite open to meeting you halfway. They offer different credit options, and interest rates are relatively low compared to what you might expect. So financially, it is definitely challenging, and the uncertainty is real. But the system itself is flexible. If you approach it in a thorough and realistic way, it gives you some room to breathe and adjust while you build your life step by step. Overall, I do not regret moving to Canada at all. Even with all the uncertainty we went through, this decision still feels right. The first years were very difficult for me. I later understood that it was hard mainly because of the climate in Toronto and the city itself. Toronto is very noisy, very crowded, and can feel overwhelming and heavy. The first 2 years were especially challenging, both emotionally and mentally. When we moved to Vancouver, everything changed. After a more thorough comparison of our lifestyle, climate preferences, and daily rhythm, I realized that this city suits me much better. I finally felt that I found a place that truly suits my personality and my pace of life. This is a place I do not want to leave, except maybe for a couple of winter months to go somewhere warm like Florida for a vacation. Comfort and emotional balance became a real priority for me here. I like living in Vancouver, and I do not regret this move. Especially after the crisis during the COVID pandemic, I clearly saw how the government supported people. At that time, I was working in fitness, and, of course, everything closed. There was a lot of uncertainty, but the government provided financial support while I was looking for a new job. and later I found remote office work. I also saw how the system worked here, especially in Vancouver. Of course, it was not perfect, but the approach was more thorough and balanced. Schools stayed open, children could continue studying, and many places worked with restrictions instead of closing completely. Overall, I really liked the way the government handled the situation here. It felt more human and structured compared to what I heard was happening in Israel or in Ukraine, and that made a big difference for me emotionally.
We can also talk a little about children, because this topic became a real priority for me after moving. I have children of different ages. My older children are already teenagers, and my youngest daughter was born in Texas in 2018. All my children live with me. Because we are still in temporary status, there is a lot of uncertainty. So we stay together as a family and do not separate until our immigration status is fully resolved. Staying together gives us emotional stability during this period. In Canada, my younger child first went to daycare and now she goes to school. I can share a few words about how this process works, how difficult it is, and whether it may suit families who are moving with children. One big advantage was during the first years when I was a student. At that time, I earned very little or sometimes nothing at all. Because of this, the government subsidized my child's daycare. She could stay there from 7:30 in the morning until 5 in the evening, which really suited our situation back then. As long as I had student status, the government either fully covered the daycare costs or covered a large part of them. When I started earning more money, this support was gradually reduced, and a much bigger part of the expenses became my responsibility. This transition also came with some uncertainty, because childcare costs are high. Daycare in Canada is quite expensive. Another very important point is that there are waiting lists. To get a place in the daycare we wanted near our home, we had to wait several months. This is why a thorough approach is necessary when planning childcare here. You cannot decide everything at the last moment. Yes, there are queues for daycare, and you need to apply in advance. So, if students move to Canada with children, one of the first things they should do is apply for daycare as early as possible. Childcare should definitely be a priority, and planning it in a thorough way helps reduce stress and uncertainty later on. Another very important point when choosing where to live in Canada is children. For families, this should be a top priority from the very beginning. At first, we chose a place close to the college. We thought that the most important thing was that I could easily get to my classes, even on foot. At that moment, studying felt like the main priority, and we did not think enough about other factors. Later, I realized that this decision did not really suit our family situation. If you move with children, the most important things are good schools and good daycares. These should be the main priorities, even more important than distance to work or college. Unfortunately, I was quite disappointed with the schools in the area where we lived. The daycare was acceptable, but it did not fully suit our expectations, and I felt that it could have been much better. Because of this experience, when I chose our next place to live, I did much more thorough research. I looked carefully at school ratings, daycare reviews, and also at the community itself. I wanted to reduce as much uncertainty as possible before making a new decision. It is very important who your neighbors are and what kind of people live around you. The area should suit families, feel calm, safe, and family-oriented. Living in the wrong environment creates constant uncertainty and stress. In our first place, we lived close to the college, but nearby there was also a large social housing area. Many people there could not afford housing on their own, and the government provided housing at very low prices. Unfortunately, this area was quite disadvantaged, and daily life there was full of uncertainty. I really regretted living there. Of course,
I feel sorry for the people who live in such conditions, but I understood that it was not an environment that would suit children. I did not want my kids to grow up surrounded by constant social problems and instability. That experience taught me that when you move with children, choosing the right neighborhood must be a priority. A thorough approach to this decision is just as important as choosing the country itself, because it helps protect your children from unnecessary uncertainty and stress. You asked how good schools and weaker schools differ. And honestly, everything depends on the people who live around the school. This is something many families underestimate, especially when there is a lot of uncertainty during a move. First of all, there is a big difference in the level of education. In Toronto, the school my son first attended had a very low academic level. Teachers did not expect much from students, and there were almost no serious requirements. At that stage, education clearly was not a priority there. When he later moved to another school, the difference was huge. The academic level was much higher, and expectations were very different. It became very difficult for him, and at some point, he could not fully cope, because the previous school did not suit proper academic preparation. The gap between schools was too big. So the first important difference is the quality of education, and whether learning is treated as a real priority. The second difference is the overall environment at school. You can imagine how important this is for teenagers. It is not only about lessons, but also about discipline, atmosphere, and what kind of behavior is considered normal. A school environment that does not suit a child can strongly affect motivation and confidence. Another important factor is the mindset of the students. The socioeconomic background of families may not directly affect intelligence, but it strongly affects attitude toward studying, life goals, and responsibility. This environment creates either stability or constant uncertainty about the future. And again, everything comes back to money. In areas with weaker schools, housing is much cheaper. In areas with good schools, rent and housing prices immediately go up. This is why many new immigrants end up in these areas. They are looking for affordable options and trying to reduce financial uncertainty. If you do not have children, this situation may suit you for some time. But if you have children, then you really need to make a different choice. In this case, schools and the surrounding environment must be a top priority, and choosing a place to live requires a thorough approach, not a rushed decision. Of course, I can give some advice to people who are planning to move to Canada. First of all, I strongly recommend doing thorough research about the place where you want to live. This is not something you should rush. You really need to understand your own priorities because they will shape your everyday life. For example, I talked to a friend of mine who lives in Toronto with her relatives. They like Toronto very much. They feel comfortable there, and for them, it is a great city. Their lifestyle and priorities match that environment. But for me personally, this city does not suit me at all. That is why I believe it is a mistake to rely too much on someone else's opinion. Everyone has different priorities. You need to ask yourself who you are, what kind of life you want, and what really matters to you on a daily basis. Without this, there will always be uncertainty in your decision. If you enjoy spending time in nature, being close to the ocean, forests, and mountains, then this should be a clear priority when choosing a place to live. In that case, a city like Vancouver will probably suit you much better than a big metropolis like Toronto. Some people say, "We'll live here for a few years and then move somewhere else." On paper, it sounds easy. In reality, it comes with a lot of uncertainty, stress, and financial pressure. Moving within Canada is not simple. It takes money, emotional energy, and time. That is why I would recommend moving right away to a place that truly suits you. A place where you can not only find job opportunities, but also enjoy daily life, feel comfortable, and build a social circle. These things should be a real priority, not an afterthought. Also, just because there are many Russian-speaking people in Toronto does not automatically mean better communication or friendships. People can have very different priorities, lifestyles, and values. Being from the same background does not always mean you will connect. So, my main advice is this. Choose a place based on thorough research and your own priorities, not because it looks popular or seems easier at first. This approach will save you from a lot of uncertainty later on. My name is Artyom, and I have interviewed around 2,000 people who moved to many different countries. I hope you enjoyed this story and that it maybe helped you improve your English. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.